Dumb Husky and His White Cat Shizun is a BL novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer: descriptive violence and triggers for sensitive content. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 29. This venerable one doesn't want you to die. That night, Amoran laid on the bed at the summit of life and death, with his hands behind his head. He stared at the roof beam, unable to fall asleep. Scenes of the past flashed by in front of his eyes. In the end, little by little, the fragments were all of Chu Wanning's cold and handsome face. Actually, Amoran didn't know what he was thinking about this person. The first time he saw him was under the flowering tree in front of Tongtian Tower. He wore a loose robe and had wide sleeves. Out of more than 20 elders, he was the only one who didn't wear the silver and blue armor of the summit of life and death. That day, he lowered his head, lost in thought as he pondered over the armor he was wearing. Half of his face looked focused and gentle, like a white cat in the warm golden sun. Amoran looked at him from afar, his gaze unable to shift away. He felt that his first impression of Chu Wanning was very good. But he couldn't endure the cold, the punishment, the harshness that came after him. The white cat's sharp teeth and claws gnawed at him until he was covered in wounds. He was rescued from the sea of fire by his uncle, his life hanging by a thread. Originally, he thought that after he came to the summit of life and death, there would be a Shizun who would treat him leniently, and truly love him. However, Chu Wanning didn't seem to see his fawning, his hard work. On the contrary, the whip was swift and fierce. The slightest mistake would tear his skin and flesh apart, leaving him a bloody mess. Later on, he found out that Chu Wanning looked down on him from the bottom of his heart. A person of bad character is hard to forge. That was what the man in white clothes under the flowering tree had said about him, right? He had once regarded Chu Wanning as the cold moon in the 9 heavens, and had sincerely respected and loved him. However, in Jushin Cold Moon's heart, what was Amoran? A disciple that he had no choice but to accept. A lowly person who despised him to the bone. A scoundrel who had grown up in a restaurant and was tainted with filth. Although Amoran was always laughing and joking, he slowly began to hate Chu Wanning. His hatred was accompanied by a strong sense of unwillingness. He was not willing to give up. In the past, he had always harbored a growing resentment towards Chu Wanning, in an attempt to gain this person's attention, to gain this person's appreciation, to gain this person's surprise. During that time, if she may had praised him with a very good, he would have been happy to the heavens. However, if Chu Wanning had been willing to praise him with a not bad, he would have been willing to die. But Chu Wanning had never praised him. No matter how hard he tried, how much effort he put in, how good he was, that cold man would always nod his head indifferently and then turn his face away. Amoran was about to go crazy. God knows how much he wanted to pinch Chu Wanning's cheeks at that time, turn him around, force him to stare at him, force him to look at him, force him to swallow that a person of bad character is hard to carve out. However, he could only kneel in front of Chu Wanning like a stray dog, kowtow, and respectfully say, "Your disciple will always remember Chu Wanning's teachings." In front of Chu Wanning, the Amoran was lowly to the bone. Even though he was a young master, he was still lowly. He finally understood that a person like Chu Wanning would never look up to him at all. Later on, he experienced many things. Amoran rose to the peak of life and death, and then ascended to the pinnacle of the cultivation world, becoming an unprecedented overlord. All of his dark subordinates trembled, all of them were afraid, and when his name was mentioned, it was as soft as a mosquito's moan. Who still remembered the stains on his face, who still remembered his unspeakable background? From then on, there was no more Emoran in the world, only Ch29. Ch29. People hated him to the extreme. The heinous Emoran, the art of rebirth could not save him even after 1,000 repetitions, and he could not be reincarnated even after 10,000 deaths. Ch29 Emoran Ch29 Emoran Ch29. Ta, Sien, Jun. But even if they were afraid, what could they do? The peak of life and death continued to roar in unison. Tens of thousands of people knelt in front of the palace of Mount Wu, and the densely packed heads knelt 3 times and kowtowed 9 times in front of him. Emperor Taksin's long life reaches the heavens, and he will not perish for generations to come. He felt extremely useful. Until he noticed Chu Wanning's face in the crowd. At that time, Chu Wanning's cultivation had been crippled, and he had been tied up in the main hall, reduced to a prisoner. Emoran was determined to put him to death, but he did not want Chu Wanning to leave so quickly. He had bound Chu Wanning's limbs, and cut open the blood vessels on Chu Wanning's neck. The cut was not big, and he had cast an incantation to stop the wound from clotting. Blood flowed out bit by bit, and his life was draining away bit by bit. The sun was burning brightly, and the coronation ceremony had already been going on for half a day. Chu Wanning's blood was about to run out. With this person dead, Emoran had completely severed all ties with the past. Therefore, he had specially arranged for Chu Wanning to bleed during his ascension ceremony, and then put him to death. By the time he had become a supreme being in the cultivation world, Chu Wanning had become a lifeless corpse. Everything that had happened yesterday had vanished into thin air. That was truly wonderful. But this person was about to die, so why was he still so indifferent? He was so handsome that he was a little heartless. His face was pale, but his expression was indifferent. When he looked at Ch29, there was neither praise nor fear. There was only disgust, contempt, and Emoran felt that he must have gone mad. Either that, or Chu Wanning had gone mad. There was also a trace of pity. Chu Wanning felt pity for himself. He was a person who was about to die, a defeated general. He actually felt pity for a person who had reached the pinnacle, an overlord who could call the wind and summon the rain. He actually dared. The rage that had been suppressed for more than 10 years had driven Emoran mad. He was at the Pilhard Palace. Of course, at that time, he had changed his name to the Mount Wu Palace. In front of thousands of people, he suddenly stood up amidst the flattery and praises of those people. His black robes billowed as he walked down the steps. In front of everyone, he pinched Chu Wanning's chin. His face was twisted, and his smile was both sweet and sinister. Shizun, today is your disciple's great day. Why are you still unhappy? The thousands of people instantly fell silent. Chu Wanning was neither servile nor overbearing. His expression was icy cold. I don't have a disciple like you. Emoran laughed heartily. His laughter was unrestrained, and his voice was like a vulture circling the corridors of the Golden Palace. Shizun is so heartless, it really makes my heart cold. He laughed and said loudly. You don't have a disciple like me? Who taught me my mental cultivation method? Who taught me my skills? Who taught me to be cruel and cold-blooded? Even now, the whips on my body have not disappeared. Let me ask you, who was the one who beat me up? His smile faded, and his voice suddenly became fierce and fierce. His eyes were cold. Chu Wanning. Is taking me as a disciple a disgrace to you? Am I a lowly person in my bones, or am I unable to wash away the filth in my blood? Let me ask you, Chu Wanning. Let me ask you, what do you mean by one's character is inferior, one's quality is hard to carve out? In the end, he also became somewhat deranged. His voice was distorted as he shouted. You never treated me as a disciple, and you never thought highly of me. But I once really treated you as a master, really respected you, loved you, and now you treat me like this? Why are you never willing to praise me? Why is it that no matter what I do, I can't get any good from you? Chu Wanning's body trembled, and his face gradually paled. He slightly opened his pair of phoenix eyes, and stared at Emo Ran. His lips moved, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, nothing came out of his mouth. At the peak of life and death, where everything remained the same, the only two people who were still in the same place faced each other like this. In this awkward silence, Emo Ran seemed to have finally calmed down. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, it was that detestable smiling face again. It was a grin that made one shudder in fear. He said gently and kindly, Shizun, don't you look down on me, don't you think I'm lowly? He paused for a moment, and then his gaze swept over the heads of thousands of people. These people were all kneeling, like dogs in front of his palace. They all acknowledged him as the High Lord of the cultivation world, one who stood above the world of mortals. Emo Ran smiled and said, what about now? Before you die, I'll ask you one more time. In this world, who is the lowly, and who is the High Lord? Who was the one who stepped on who? Who was the one who became the king? Who is the loser? Chu Wanning lowered his eyes, as if he was still immersed in Emo Ran's confession, and had yet to recover from his shock. Finally, it was Emo Ran who pinched his chin and forced him to lift his face. But just as he was forcing him to look at himself, Emo Ran suddenly froze. For the first time, he saw a look of regret on Chu Wanning's face. That look was too unfamiliar. Emo Ran felt as if he had been scalded, and he reflexively loosened his grip on Chu Wanning's face. You. Chu Wanning's expression was very painful, as if he was enduring some kind of heart-wrenching, bone-chilling pain. His voice was very soft, almost hoarse. Floating in the wind, only Emo Ran heard it. He said, I'm sorry, Emo Ran. It's Master's fault. In that instant, everything around him lost all sound. The sound of the wind, the sound of vegetation, the sound of robes fluttering, all returned to silence. Only Chu Wanning's face, which was the only clear face in the world, was the only one in the world. It was the only sight he could see. At that time, he should have had many thoughts. Joy, elation, ecstasy. But it wasn't. At that time, his thoughts were very strange. Speaking of which, there was only one thought. He didn't know when, he had become so much taller than Chu Wanning. Time really had passed for a long time. Many things in the past had changed. Emo Ran's lips twitched, and he muttered, what, did you say? Chu Wanning, on the other hand, smiled. That smile was both familiar and unfamiliar to Emo Ran. Emo Ran could see his own twisted expression in that pair of phoenix eyes. Then, those eyes slowly closed, and Chu Wanning fell on his back. Emo Ran had grabbed Chu Wanning's shoulder almost as soon as he fell. He howled crazily and angrily, like a beast on the verge of collapse. Chu Wanning! Chu Wanning, what did you say? Say it again. The person in his arms did not reply. His lips were as pale as pear blossoms, and his handsome face had always been cold and detached. But before he died, his face had frozen on a somewhat forlorn smile, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. It was the face that Emoran had first seen in front of the Tower of Babel in his memories. He smiled gently, and it was somewhat gentle. Chu Wanning. The gentleness shattered, and the crabapple blossoms fell to the ground. He finally got what he wanted, stepping on Shizun's life and ascending to the top of the world. But what was this? What was this? The bitterness and hatred in his heart had only increased. What was this? Emoran condensed a faint black mist in his palm, and his fingertips flew up and down. He quickly touched several of Chu Wanning's blood vessels, sealing off the last of his heart chi. Do you want to die like this? Emoran's eyes bulged, and his face was ferocious. It's not over yet, Chu Wanning. We haven't settled the score between us, it's not over yet. It's not over yet. If you don't make things clear for me, I'll crush Shwemang, Kunlun's snow-treading palace, and the last few people you wanted to protect. Tear them all to pieces. You better think it through. The ceremony stopped, and he no longer cared about the thousands of people kneeling there. He changed his mind. He didn't want Chu Wanning to die. He hated him, and he wanted Chu Wanning to live. He picked up the man who had lost too much blood, and used his lightness kung fu to leap onto the roof. His robes fluttered in the wind like an eagle's wings, and he quickly flew over the layers of eaves, heading straight for the south peak to the Red Lotus Pavilion, the place where Chu Wanning had once lived. There was plenty of spiritual energy there, and there were plenty of immortal herbs. He wanted to save Chu Wanning. Only when one was alive could one hate. Once one was dead, there would be no reason to hate. Had he gone crazy and wanted to kill Chu Wanning with his own hands? If Chu Wanning died, then what was left of him in this world? Lying on the bed, he licked his memory alone. It was the middle of the night, but he couldn't sleep any longer. Emoran got up, washed his face, and put on his clothes. Carrying a lantern, he walked towards the Yama's hall. Chu Wanning must have casually bandaged his wound, and then he was punished to kneel there. Emoran was well aware of Emoran's character. He was stubborn and stubborn. He never considered whether or not his body could handle it. Even if Shwemang wanted to stop him, he wouldn't be able to. Sure enough, when he arrived outside the Yama's hall, he saw a green bean-shaped lantern burning in solitude, and the candle's tears kept dripping down. Chu Wanning was kneeling with his back facing the door. His figure was tall and straight, and he was as handsome as a pine tree. When he saw his back, Emoran felt a little regretful. It was the middle of the night. What was he doing? Was he looking for Chu Wanning? Was he crazy? But since he was already here, he felt foolish to turn around and leave just like that. He thought for a moment, and came up with a compromise. He placed the lantern by his feet, and didn't plan to leave, nor did he plan to enter. He just stood outside the window, propping his elbows on the window sill, and propping up his cheeks, watching Chu Wanning from afar. The copper bell at the corner of the eaves swayed gently, and the night was filled with the fragrance of flowers and plants. The two of them, one standing and the other kneeling, were separated by the vermilion window and the empty hall of silence. If they were alive, Emoran would have had sufficient strength to break into the hall and force Chu Wanning to end his reflection and go back to rest. If Chu Wanning didn't want to, he would have had sufficient strength to seal Chu Wanning's hands and feet, and violently carry him away. But now, he had neither the strength nor the strength. He wasn't even as tall as Chu Wanning. Amoran's mood was complicated. He stood outside the window and looked at the person inside, but the person inside didn't notice. He couldn't see Chu Wanning's facial features, and Chu Wanning couldn't see his face either. Thus, the white cat knelt for the entire night, and didn't look back. Thus, the silly dog also stood for the entire night, and didn't go far. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.